A nefarious influence campaign is underway, one propagated by the U.S. government on social media to influence other governments. How interesting this is, this report from the New York Times, this article, the Pentagon orders review of its overseas social media campaigns. So the White House is not happy about what the Pentagon has been doing, which is a secretive operation to influence populations overseas. The review follows a decision by Twitter and Facebook over the summer to shut down misleading accounts that they determined were sending messages about U.S. foreign policy interests abroad. Those were government accounts. So let's get this straight. So the U.S. government is using coordinated, inauthentic Facebook and Twitter accounts to influence politics in other countries. One campaign, again, I'm reading from this New York Times article. It's a terrific article. One campaign targeting Iran spread divisive messages about life there. The account involved pushed out views that both supported and opposed the Iranian government. The disinformation effort resembled the methods used by Russia to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election. We're doing the thing.
Yeah,
we're doing the thing.
This reminds me of that time someone tried to press Trump on what some other government was doing, that Russia or China or something, and he says, hey, we've got killers too.
A lot of killers, Bill.
Of killers.
That's my favorite Trump line. A lot of killers, Bill. You think we're so innocent?
Yes, and look, so often you get accused of doing both siderism by pointing this kind of thing out. But it's one thing to say...
This article could literally be called Both Sides. It just is both sides.
Because the reality is that the U.S. government often frames what other governments do as evidence that they are not democracies, that they are constitutionally and as a nation inferior to the United States of America. And you can critique their behavior. But what so many people on the left are always trying to point out is that America is often doing much of the same thing. And so if you think it's bad, that's great. You also have to be critical of what's happening in our own country on the same
Well,
thing.
I've been critical of some Republicans who've been doing this, especially with social media companies, when they haul Zuckerberg and Dorsey and everyone else before Congress, and they start saying, why are you bowing to Chinese censorship? By the way, here are the policies I want you to implement. Well, you're yelling at them for doing what the Chinese government wants, but now you, the U.S. government, are dictating them what you think they should do. Let's be a little careful here. So this sounds like another, and for, again, I don't want to come off as sounding like a shill for social media companies, but they're in this weird position where they make everyone so mad, but here they are combing through the accounts, identifying which are just like government actors trying to fool everyone, and they're like, okay, guys, what do you want us to do? What are we supposed to do? You get mad when there's coordinated misinformation on our platforms, or when there's inauthentic behavior. We get yelled at, we get screamed at. And you're doing it. Like, how are we supposed to handle this? Okay, I am speaking as if I'm them right now. Like that's a huge frustration.
Yeah, I mean, look, friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald, is pointing out how hypocritical all of this is, saying, in fact, if I'm reading this New York Times article correctly, these online Pentagon influence operations, quote, were similar to how Beijing often spreads disinformation and, quote, resembles the methods used by Russia to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election. The U.S. does this too, he writes. So, I mean, this is really the core issue, that so many people, we just saw the African Socialist Party member scooped up by the FBI over this, accused of peddling Russian disinformation because he's been saying the same things about how the United States government has been unfair to Black Americans since time immemorial. He says, I've been talking about this since the Civil Rights Movement. How can you accuse me of doing Russian disinformation? Over and over again, there's always going to be people who put information out there, information that is oftentimes not especially novel, but picks up on themes that already exist and discontent that already exists in society. It doesn't make it right. I don't think that other people should generally be interfering with other people's governments either way. But when you see what the United States has been doing in the exact same vein, and when you see how vilified, we talked about Edward Snowden in an earlier segment, whistleblowers who have exposed behavior like this have been, how vilified they've been by the American government. The whole argument against Russian disinformation and 2016 being stolen and Democrats being consumed with Russiagate for the last 4 years completely falls apart.
No, absolutely. And to be clear, again, this is a serious both sides issue, because there's also a report today from the Washington Post about a China-based network targeting American users on social media, on Meta, on Facebook, etc., and where this covert influence operation used accounts on Facebook and Instagram posing as Americans to post opinions about hot button issues such as abortion and other people. The network, which focused on the United States and Czech Republic, posted from the fall of 2021 through 2022. Which, if they're doing, whatever, if they're doing it on Facebook, this actually sounds a little bit like the Rush. Like, how many people saw this? Who cares? There's tons of political content on Facebook. It's not like, oh, I saw this one account about how Marco Rubio is bad, and now it's
Russians told me there's racism, so now I hate the government.
But however, the only thing I think that is worrying, if China is doing this, well, China does have a social media app where it has very total control over what the content would be in TikTok, which is under the purview of the Chinese government. So there, I think they would have the power, if they so chose, to exercise editorial control in a way that could actually be harmful to U.S. interests. I mean, they could engage in a much more robust kind of influence or censorship campaign on an app that is the most popular social media site for U.S.
I think that's part of why people have to get an education in how to identify, I don't want to use the word fake news, but to have a more critical lens of our own media. This is something that is often the subject of a lot of, graduate and college level education. Part of what you learn in those kinds of contexts is how to be discerning about the enormous stream of media that comes your way, how to look at sources, how to understand graphs. This is an important part, I think, of the public education, regardless of whether or not you think everybody should go to college. These are things that people need to learn for this kind of reason. And one lesson that I would point to that people should really be looking for is, are these stories that force us to think negatively of each other? A lot of these cultural stories are there to make us feel like our class allies are not in fact allies at all, because they have a different opinion about trans people in sports, or because they have a different opinion about some other cultural issue that, in all likelihood, unless you have a trans kid or a trans yourself, does not affect you personally. So it's not to say you shouldn't care about X, Y, and Z, that you shouldn't have your opinion one way or the other about the police or whatever the issue is. But at the end of the day, is there a focus on whether or not you should hate your neighbor, or is there a focus on whether or not you and your neighbor are both being screwed by people like Nancy Pelosi, who right now is not able to gather the votes for a ban on Congress members doing insider trading? I
guess I would hope that ideally some statistical literacy, or literacy with reading graphs and those things. Is that really a skill you can only pick up after you get into graduate school?
Whenever
Shouldn't that be something
it happens,
our 8th graders are becoming literate at?
However long it takes. But unfortunately, especially because of the delays of COVID, 8th graders are not understanding these things. 12th graders are not understanding these things, and it's not getting any easier.
How are we supposed to teach them to read if they can't even fit inside the building? Zoolander quote. Zoolander quote. More Rising right after this.